There we are. Are we good? Are we on? Excellent. Thank you. So, we have been journeying into the depths of God. We need to turn it a little, do we, Ben? Thank you. Might need you to hit the button for me to be able to use this, Ben. Sorry about that. There we go. Excellent. What we called Into the Deep, looking at going in deep with God. And we've travelled in it for 3 weeks, and I thought it'd be a good time just to do a very short recap. Does anyone remember what the story was the first week we started?
Transfiguration.
The Transfiguration. Excellent. Top marks to Lou. So it started with the Transfiguration. What happened in the Transfiguration? What on earth is that about? Bit of a strange thing, wasn't it? Does anyone remember? Who were the people there? Moses, Elijah, Jesus, Peter, James and John. So Jesus brings up Peter, James and John with him, doesn't he? Suddenly he starts to shine. It's quite a strange situation. And then Moses and Elijah are there speaking with him. What we saw in the end was actually the impact it had on Peter. Because Peter describes that in his second epistle. He describes that. And he said, Peter found that he has all he needs to fulfill his calling in the experience of God in Jesus and the Spirit. And the thing he looks back to is that moment in the Transfiguration when God says, "This is my son, listen to him. My beloved son, listen to him." What I love in that, it says, he has all he needs to fulfill his calling. But Peter's way of describing his calling is, he says, our calling is the glory and virtue of God. That's a big calling, isn't it? It's a stunning calling. So Peter says, I saw God's glory there. I saw that. And that's our calling to that place. Quite incredible. The second week we looked at, does anyone remember? I do this all the time. Moses. In fact, we had the first bit of Moses, and we looked at the burning bush and then darkness. So in the first bit we saw him, he went into light in the burning bush, saw God as light. In the second one though, he goes into the darkness and sees God there in the darkness. And we explored a bit of that with a guy named Gregory of Nyssa, talking about that usually Scripture talks about God being light, but actually there are a few times it talks about God in the darkness too, and that is us looking for the infinite nature of God, looking for us as finite people, looking for something beyond us. Now, we didn't use those exact words of infinite because they didn't have those words at the time, but he talked about God being incomprehensible, beyond our understanding. And we looked at a little bit of the infinite nature of God, and we said this, that God infinitely fills every infinitely small space with his presence, love, and power. So God being infinite isn't just about God being everywhere. He's not stretched thin, but he's thick in every space. Every infinitely small space is infinitely filled with God. Last week, we looked at another bit of Moses. So we stepped on to Moses part 2, and we saw that in those 2 stories before, we stopped at a point, after that, God reveals himself. What does he reveal himself as in the burning bush? What's that, sorry?
The words spoken to him?
No, he gives a name. He says, I am. Yeah. He says, I am. So he reveals who he is. Then we see in the next one, when in the darkness, which is actually the giving of the law, he walks before Moses and shows his glory and says, Yahweh, Yahweh, which means he is the merciful, gracious God, doesn't he? He talks about his mercy and his grace. Talks about his loving kindness. So he reveals his glory and says his character is that glory, the character of God, who forgives sins, yet doesn't leave them unpunished, which is quite incredible. And we see that really only in the cross do we see that happen, don't we, in the resurrection. We see that they were punished, but we were forgiven. Quite an incredible thing. And then we actually talked about, there was a guy named Evagrius Ponticus who talked about these three things, that in the revelation of God, we gain the knowledge of God and the world and us. He called it theoria. That was his name, his word. It's a Greek word. It can mean to see, can mean to know, sort of a mix of those things. The knowledge of God. And now he talked about the knowledge coming through what he called contemplative prayer. Now, there's that time with God that you know God. Therefore, you know yourself and you know the world around you. And those things give you a thing he called apatheia, which isn't apathy, even though that's where we get our word apathy from, but is the health of the soul. In other words, you're not thrown about by the things of the world, but you're healthy internally. And that produces love. So that's where we've got so far, which is a lovely thing, and it's talking about the impact of God on our lives, isn't it, so far? But I think important, how do we get this stuff happening in our lives? How do we know? See, part of the knowledge of God is understanding the bit before that he infinitely fills every space, isn't it? But I want the experience of Peter, knowing that God fulfills all things. How do I get that? So today we're going to step on to the next bit, which is looking at another guy that was up there. We've looked at Moses, but the other one that was there was Elijah. And it'd be good to look at Elijah's experience of God, wouldn't it? So let's have a look at that. And here is our picture of Elijah. He's being fed by the ravens. This is part of the story. We won't actually get to that little bit, but he's fed by the ravens in the desert. And so let's have a look. We're going to actually read through the whole of chapter 19, which isn't long, thankfully, because it's a good story. And it starts with, it says, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had executed all the prophets of Baal with the sword. Now, we probably need to explain a little bit about this, don't we? Who the heck is Ahab? Who is Jezebel? We know Elijah. And who are the prophets of Baal? So really important in this to give a bit of context. Many of you know a bit of the context, but actually, I think it's very much like some things we see sometimes in some countries now. Because Israel, now there were, by this stage there were two parts of Israel. There was a northern country which was called Israel and a southern one called Judah. And Elijah lives up in the northern one, who are meant to be following Yahweh. But Ahab marries this woman named Jezebel, who is a Phoenician, and she institutes Baal worship and Asherah worship and actually starts killing the prophets of God and has people line up and kiss the Baal. And they had to do that as part of what they had to do. So it was a thing to test loyalty. And so this Queen Jezebel had set this up. And the nation of Israel, well, anyone who was a follower of Yahweh was oppressed. Many of the prophets were killed. Elijah thinks they're all dead. In fact, Elijah has fled just before this. So it's a pretty oppressive state, isn't it? We don't tend to come to this understanding that. Those reading at the time would have understood a lot more. And if you read the bits around it, you go, oh my goodness, this isn't just, she was just a bad woman. No, she is oppressing and killing anyone who follows Yahweh. But Elijah comes back, he's actually in exile for a bit, comes back, and Ahab meets him, and Ahab says, what trouble are you going to bring me now? You know? And Elijah says, bring everyone to Mount Carmel and we will see whose God is the real God. So this is the background of this story. Elijah does that and he says bring the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asherah, and they come along and he says, all right, we're going to set up a thing. We're going to put all this wood in there. You put a bull on top and call your god Baal to come down and burn it up. And so they start first thing in the morning and they're calling to their God and they're whipping themselves and doing all these things to get their God to burn it up. And by noon, Elijah starts to taunt them. And I love the taunts. Many of our scriptures say, is he busy? Now, technically it does say that, but actually it's a euphemism for is he on the toilet? Where's your God? Is he busy? Gone on a trip somewhere, he says, or is he busy on the toilet, really? Good taunts, aren't they? Where's your God? And eventually Elijah says, that's enough. You've had your go. And then he says, soak the thing with water. Absolutely soak it with water. And they do. They pour amounts of water on it, and such that the thing's filled up with water underneath it. And then he calls out to God, and God brings down fire, and the thing gets burnt up. And all the people are amazed, like, oh, Yahweh is the true God. And so Elijah has the prophets of Baal slain with the sword as Jezebel slew the prophets of Yahweh. That's a pretty big win. You'd think at that stage you'd be pretty happy with God and with everything that's happening, wouldn't you? You would go, we just won the big battle. Here we have, Ahab tells Jezebel all that Elijah did, doesn't he? She goes back to Jezebel and says, he did this. Ahab is the king, but Jezebel is really the power. And what does Jezebel say? It says, Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, let the gods do to me and more if I do not, as of tomorrow, make your life as the life of one of them. In other words, may the gods do it to me if I don't kill you tomorrow. That's what she's saying. So, you think Elijah will stand there and say, ha ha, I have Yahweh with me? When he heard this, he ran for his life. I find this quite amazing, isn't it, when you see the things. And went to Beersheba of Judah, which is obviously the southern kingdom, so he's going to safety, and left his servant there. He went into the wilderness a day's journey and sat under a broom tree. Doesn't sound like a triumphant win, does it? Interesting, what it actually sounds like to me possibly is bipolarism. He's up here and then he's crashed to here. There's something in there, isn't there, that Elijah's really struggling. So let's have a look and see what happens with it. And he asked of his life that he might die. And often you'll see in this, it'll say what he did and then it'll explain it deeper. And then it says, it is too much now, Yahweh. Take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. In other words, he wants to die because he's feeling like he's failed, even though he's just had this amazing victory. Have you ever felt that? You have something amazing happen, then just after it you crash? I've certainly had that. Definitely. He lay down and slept under the broom tree, and behold, an angel came and touched him and said to him, get up and eat. He looked up, and by his head was a bread cake baked on coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and went back and lay down. That's fair. He's still laying down. He's still obviously not in a good space, is he? He's moping, isn't he? He's depressed. That's what it seems like, doesn't it? Hiding in a hole. The angel came a second time, touched him and said, arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. Now, I've smoothed this over lovingly in my translation here, but actually I had a chuckle when I saw how it was written, because it says, arise, eat, for too great for you the journey is. They do talk like that. Yes, Yoda is alive. I read it and went, oh, that's funny. Yes, I have to say it. Not how we translate, because obviously the words around, and that's all they did with Yoda, move his words around the wrong way to make him sound mysterious. It's the way the Hebrews obviously wrote. But anyway, and he got up and ate and drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights. That's impressive food, isn't it? This reminds me of another thing like that, the lembas bread in, was it Lord of the Rings, for all those that are into those sorts of cultural things, until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Have we heard of Horeb before? Horeb, the mountain of God. Does anyone know where that was?
Is that Sinai?
What's that?
Is that Sinai?
Now this is very interesting. We think it's Sinai, but we know it's where the burning bush was. And God says you'll come back here, but when they come back, they call it Sinai, so there's confusion as to whether they're the same mountain. Some say yes, it is, and likely, the way the scripture sort of paints it, that they're the same mountain, but it certainly was where the burning bush was, Mount Horeb. So he comes to the mountain of God at Horeb. And he went there into a cave and spent the night there. And behold, the word of Yahweh came to him and said to him, "Why are you here, Elijah?" And he said, "Surely I have been zealous for Yahweh, the God of hosts. For the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant. Your altars have been torn down and your prophets killed with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek to take my life." Woe is me. That's exactly it, isn't it? It is a woe is me statement, isn't it? I alone am left. You can see how he's feeling, can't you? He's putting his heart on the line. I'm all that's left. I'm on my own fighting for you, and it's terrible, and they're just going to kill me. So is that how it will all be? Maybe not. Wouldn't be in Scripture if it was, wouldn't it? And he said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before Yahweh." So it's weird that Yahweh says, "Go out and stand on the mountain before Yahweh." That's right. And behold, Yahweh passed before him, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before Yahweh. But Yahweh is not in the wind. Now, we talked about this before. I love the fact that wind could break rocks. That's an impressive thing, isn't it? Yahweh is not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But Yahweh was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake was a fire. But Yahweh was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. You've got these three amazing things for which if anyone is sort of within, they're a major thing in your life, aren't they? A wind that smashes rocks, well, I've never been in that. I've been in some heavy wind, but not that. An earthquake, I've been in one of those. They're pretty impressive. You remember it. And a fire, I've seen them at a bit of distance. Haven't been within one, which is good, or in a big fire. And yet what's important here? A still small voice. We're going to come back to that. But let's see what the voice says. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and stood at the mouth of the cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, "Why are you here, Elijah?" It's interesting. It sort of says what it said just before. And he said, "Surely I have been zealous for the Yahweh, the God of hosts. For the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant. Your altars have been torn down, and your prophets killed with the sword. And I alone am left, and they seek to take my life." You see here, most likely what's happened here is he hasn't done it twice, is that this is a larger explanation of the one before, like we had a little before. Possibly. We don't know. Maybe it happened twice. So what does Yahweh say? Yahweh says to him, "Go and return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. Enter and anoint Hazael, king over Aram, and anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel-Meholah, as prophet under you. Whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu will kill. And whoever escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha will kill. Yet I have left 7,000 in Israel, who have all never bent the knee to Baal, and who have not all kissed him with their mouths." It's interesting, isn't it? Is he answering Elijah's problems? Yes. So let's have a look at this, because that's important to look at, isn't it? God's word to Elijah. First of all, what are Elijah's problems? What is his trouble? He's the only one left? Yeah. So I've got to, first of all, he's angered Jezebel, and she's threatened to kill him, hasn't he? And he knows that she'll do it, because she's killed all the others.
And she said she's going to kill him tomorrow.
Yeah. She says, "I'm going to kill you, or else let the gods kill me if I don't. So I'm really doing this." She was very angry. And he feels he's the only follower left. You ever felt that? That you're the only one left? The only one doing it? Well, I'm the only one that does any work around here. That's the cry, isn't it? You've probably felt that. Is it true? When Lou and I first were Christians, I got saved in a little youth group down Glenelg, and I actually didn't know that other Christians existed. And in my head, we were virtually all that were left. With this little remnant of Christians, and there were none anywhere else, because I'd never met any genuine Christians. I'd met a lot of people that went to church, but I didn't see them as genuine. They didn't seem to have the experience I had and didn't know that. And so I thought we were all that was left. And I was utterly keen to start things up again and let's win the world, because it needs it. Still does. But I didn't realise I wasn't. And then I heard about this church that was up Seaton Way that had about nearly 1,000 people and were full of Christians. That must be the most amazing place on earth. It's a good place, but it's not quite what I envisaged. I was young, naive Christian, very excited. And what we had down Glenelg was a bunch of young Christians that mostly didn't know other Christians existed and thought we were it and thought we had to do everything. So it's amazing what that does for you. Anyway, he feels he's the only follower left. He's angered Jezebel. So what is God going to do? What is God's response to him? God's response is, I'll deal with Jezebel and Ahab by Hazael in Aram, who does come and attack them, and Jehu, who overtakes them and actually has her killed, has her thrown out of the palace. In fact, she gets up there in all her finery and shows off and says, I'm here, you can't get me. But Jehu's got even her slaves come in, her servants, but they weren't usually eunuchs, and they throw her out the window and the dogs come and eat her. It's quite a horrible ending, but horrible ending to a horrible woman. It's one of those things, isn't it? A woman who'd done terrible things. So he deals with them, deals with Jezebel and Ahab, and he also deals with the fact that in Elijah there's the last of the prophets, he thinks, by saying there's a guy Elisha I want you to take under you and you take on to do more. And Elisha does. In fact, it's incredible. You read Kings and Elijah's this great prophet, but Elisha does more stuff. It's pretty good. So the other thing he says is, you're not the only one left. These are good things to say, aren't they? If God said this to you, your cry are these two things, that they're going to kill me and I'm the only one left. He says, no, in fact, they're the ones that are going to die. You'll be okay. And there are 7,000 more that have never bent the knee and kissed the Baals. That's good, isn't it? Sometimes we don't know what we've got, do we? We don't know the people around us. We don't know who are with us. It's important to hear these words from God, aren't they, in your heart? Often we're struggling with things in life. You struggle with things and we think, oh, it's so tough outside, but we really do need to hear the still small voice of God in those times, don't we? See, I look at all this and I think the important thing is, how did he hear God say this? If we're so busy doing stuff, how are you going to hear? How will God get through this word? If you're looking for him in the noise, how are you going to hear? I've gone back to some of the mystics in each of these. I'm going to go to one more this year. It won't take long for him, but a guy named Meister Eckhart, we're going to hear from again in a little bit too. He's a German theologian mystic. He's a little bit later. He's sort of 13th to 14th century. The earlier ones we've seen are 3rd and 4th century. What I love about him is he's a bit different, because all the early ones we have, to them the greatest thing you can be is to be a monk away in the desert. But Meister Eckhart was loved particularly by the reformers and people like that, because he thought a bit differently. This was one of his main gigs. He says this. He says, some people shun all company and always want to be alone. He's talking about going off into the desert here. He says, was that the best thing? No. If a man is in a wrong state, he is so everywhere and with anybody. In other words, if you're in a wrong place, you're in a wrong place anywhere. You don't have to be alone to do that. But if a man is in a right state, in truth, he has God with him. That's interesting, isn't it? He's saying you don't have to run to the desert to find God. You need God with you where you are. So a very different sort of person. He said, actually, this mystic spirituality, this deep spirituality, should be able to be had right where you are. Christ had it, didn't he? And he was amongst the people. So it was a bit of a break from centuries of the idea that the monks were the great ones, that's how you became a great person with God. He actually broke away from that a fair bit and said, actually, no. Running away isn't the trick. And so, yes, many of the reformers loved him. This is his other thing that he liked to talk about. So God the Father gives birth to the Son in the ground and essence of the soul, and thus unites himself with her. The her is the soul, female. In other words, what he talks about is not a mysticism where you get away and that's how you get with God, but a mysticism where God comes and births his Son in your soul. And that is where life comes from. This is a good thing, isn't it? I speak about similar things to this, and that's why I really resonate with Meister Eckhart. Meister just means master. Eckhart, we actually don't know what his first name is. We don't even know if Eckhart really was his name. It's just what he was called. But I love this idea that he comes and unites himself with your soul. Which he does, doesn't he? Now, we tend to think of this as a new birth moment when you become Christian, but actually Meister Eckhart's talking about it as the constant living in God, as the space that you find God regularly. So it's different. It's not just this happens. And one of the problems, I think, with modern theology and modern preaching in churches is we talk about this as a salvation event and that's it. And you were saved, now you go on and do your stuff. But actually, no, this is an ongoing birthing of Jesus in your soul. That's what you're after. So how do we have that happen? So he says this about it. He says, there must be a silence and a stillness. And the Father must speak in that, plant his word into you in that, and give birth to his Son, and perform all his works free from all images. That's interesting, isn't it? What does he mean by that? One of the things I think that our world is really bad at is we must have something on all the time. We must have an image. We must, even, I know a lot of people that say, oh, but that's how I feel God when I see this and I see that. Yes, that's true. But Meister Eckhart's saying, yeah, that's okay. But there's more. And you need to be able to find God in a space where there is nothing but God. That's where the still small voice comes. That's where God speaks into your soul, where he births Christ in your soul. That's the key thing. You may find God in all these things, but he says, actually, you need this. You need to learn how to do this to really have Christ birth in your soul. Quite an intense guy, isn't he? I found him such, but I like him. So what does this mean for us? And Elijah and the things that happened there. Being silent before God. In other words, hearing the still small voice. Elijah heard God when the noise stopped, didn't he? And he listened in the silence. There was a lot of noise. Wind like that makes a lot of noise, doesn't it? Earthquake makes a lot of noise. It certainly does, doesn't it? Rumbles, doesn't it? Fires make a lot of noise. But when did he hear God? When the noise stopped. And he listened in the silence, didn't he? God can be seen in the things that we fill our lives with. It's not that he can't. It's not that God can't be seen there, but the problem is the still small voice can only be heard when the noises cease and we stop. That's the key thing. Reality is the still small voice is God speaking into our lives. And if you're in a space like Elijah where it's a mess happening right now, how do you hear God? Do you keep running back to your noise? Which is our habit these days, isn't it? Or do you allow yourself to hear a still small voice? My question for you today is, how much time do you take without noise? Have you built into your life time without noise? That means without a feed on your phone, without I don't know what else you do, music happening here. I know a lot of people that say, I turn music on so I can worship, and that's okay. But if you want God to speak into your life clearly, there's a point where you need to go, actually, just you and me, God. Just you and me. How much time do you take without noise? That's the challenge for today. Can you do that? Can you sit with God silently for just a little bit of time? 5 minutes. And you'll see whether God speaks to that situation. What I thought we'd do now, instead of a big prayer time or anything, is actually have a few minutes of silence. For you to sit here now and listen for that still small voice. You don't need to have words for after here. This is for your time. If you get one, good, that's fine. You can, but this is for you and God. Take a moment just to allow God to touch your heart and speak to your soul. We will need to come out of this time. Sorry about that. Recognise others are going off to do some things. My hope is that you experience a bit of God there. Does anyone have anything that they want to share from it? You don't have to, because it was meant to be time for you. But
what he said, he hears us.
what's that? Sorry.
He hears us.
That's what you heard, hey? Yeah.
If we feel helpless, we remember that he hears us.
Yeah. That's certainly Elijah's experience, isn't it? Elijah was helpless, and God did hear him and answered with action for Elijah to do, but answered with what he needed. Yeah, it's very good. My hope is that you learn a little bit of adding into your life some of this stuff. I have a system at the moment in the morning. I wake up, I get my cup of tea, and then I go sit in this spot, and I try to sit with nothing sort of around me. I have my cup of tea, and it's just me and God. And interestingly, at the moment it's really good because it's dark. I've always hated the dark mornings, but now I'm loving them. And I sort of go until it lights up. Until I go and go, oh, it's all light around, Sort of, I've tried to put a minimum half an hour of just sitting with God. That's for me. You don't need to do that much. But I suggest you practice 5 minutes. Sit with God in silence. Allow God to speak to your heart, particularly in that time. Find God in it, and see how that impacts your heart, impacts where you are. We talk about telling people to pray for 5 minutes a day, but actually, I struggle with that a bit because you're just speaking at God. Most people are in their understanding of prayer, but actually, sitting with God and allowing God to touch your heart is actually the most important thing. It's the thing that brings life. And then you can pray. You can pray with power and life. So, hopefully you enjoyed even that little bit of silence. And those that were online got to do that too. Well, let's move on. We've got a few notices to give. First thing is, for all those that are here, we have soup on tonight. There's quite a bit of it out there. There'll be plenty for everyone, I think. So after service tonight, soup night. Yay. Then next week, we continue with Into the Deep. It's continuing next week. But the week after that, we have The Edge of Glory, Fully Realising God's Promises Today with John Pioverson. That's on Sunday, July 20th, 5 o'clock here. Get along. Those online, come along. It'll be good. Should be a great time. Enjoyable. I have one more notice just to talk about. For those that weren't here last week, we're looking, decision has been made at Better Together in town that we will do a Better Together South here in this place here. So a ministry to the international students. So far, we know we'll start possibly October, maybe late September, do a first one, and hoping to get some funding for that and things like that. Should be good, but also that we have help that kind of like Gardens here is the church here has said we can have it for free, and they will be part of it, helping out, which we need, and then trying to connect with certain things, particularly at Flinders, but even at Adelaide and Uni SA. I think it's a real great opportunity. We'll only be doing it once every 4 weeks. I do the city in between, so it'll be like 2 weeks there, then here, then there, then here. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to connect to more international students. We've had quite a few come through, and obviously a couple stay. So yeah, that's very exciting. So what I want you to do is just to think about, how can I help? What can I do? How can I be part of it? And we'd love you to all be a part of it. It will be a Thursday night. That's when they do there, and so we'll just swap Thursday night so it's easy for the students. They found that was a good night for them. Other than that, there's the banking details on that. So the soup will be on very soon. I don't know how long away. Maybe we'll say grace now, hey? And then I'll go find out how quickly we can get in there. Let's say grace. Father, we thank you for tonight, for those that cooked, for the food we're about to eat. Lord, may our fellowship be good together. and may we know you with us. Amen. So I'll go check how they are. And good to see you, Anne.